It was a quiet Sunday morning when Daniel parked his car near the small cemetery at the edge of town. The air was cool and still, and a soft mist hung over the grass. He carried a bouquet of white lilies in one hand, the same kind his wife had loved. Every Sunday since her passing, he made the same trip, following the same path to the same spot. It had been almost a year now, but for Daniel, time hadn't moved forward. It had simply stopped the day she left. He walked slowly, his footsteps sinking into the damp ground. When he reached her grave, he knelt down and brushed away the leaves that had gathered on the stone. The name carved into it still made his chest tighten every time he saw it. Laura Bennett, it read, followed by the dates that marked her short but beautiful life. He placed the lilies carefully and sat down beside the grave like he always did. He talked to her quietly, as if she were still there listening. He told her about the weather, about the little things happening in town, about how empty the house felt without her. It was his way of keeping her close. They had spent 25 years together. 25 years of love, laughter, arguments, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. They hadn't had children, though they had tried for years. Doctors said it wasn't possible, and after a while they stopped trying. It had been painful, but they had learned to fill that space with each other. Sometimes, when Daniel sat there talking, he could almost hear her voice again, soft and calm, teasing him for worrying too much. He would close his eyes and imagine her smiling, the way she used to when she caught him rambling about his day. Those small moments were all he had left now. That morning, something felt slightly different. When he looked around, he noticed a young man standing a few yards away, not too close but not far either. The man looked to be in his early 20s, maybe younger. He had dark hair, a plain jacket, and a bouquet of a single white rose in his hand. Daniel thought perhaps he was visiting someone else, but the young man kept glancing his way as if uncertain about approaching. Daniel tried to ignore it, but the stranger's presence lingered in his mind. After a few minutes, the young man quietly walked away, leaving the white rose on the edge of the graveyard path before disappearing through the gate. Daniel frowned. It wasn't unusual to see other visitors there, but something about that moment stayed with him. The way the young man had looked at him, almost like he recognized him, made Daniel uneasy. He brushed it off, telling himself it didn't matter. Maybe the man had been lost in his own thoughts. Still, on his drive home, Daniel couldn't shake the image. The rose, the stare, the uncertainty in his eyes. The house was silent when he returned. It had always been quiet, but now the silence felt heavier. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the rain begin to fall. Laura's favorite mug sat on the shelf, untouched since she passed. He hadn't moved any of her things. Her scarf still hung by the door, her book still sat by the bed, and her voice still echoed in his mind whenever the house grew too still. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that young man standing near Laura's grave. The memory replayed again and again. Who was he? Did he know Laura? Or was it just a coincidence? He told himself to forget it, but curiosity had a way of keeping him awake. The next Sunday, Daniel returned as usual. It was a bright day this time, with sunlight falling through the trees. When he reached the grave, he noticed something strange. A small white rose resting beside the lilies he had placed the week before. It was fresh, just like the one the young man had carried. He stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Someone had been here. Someone who cared enough to bring a flower. His chest tightened. Could it be the same person? As he stood there lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, and there he was, the same young man standing a few feet away. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The young man looked nervous, like he didn't know what to say or if he should even be there. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Did you know her?" he asked softly. The young man hesitated, his gaze falling to the ground. "Not exactly," he said quietly. "But she knew me." Daniel frowned, confused. "She knew you?" The young man nodded, but didn't explain further. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke again. "I'm sorry if this seems strange. I needed to come here." Then he turned and walked away before Daniel could say another word. Daniel stood frozen, watching him disappear beyond the trees. His heart pounded. What did that mean? She knew me? How? He tried to make sense of it, but the more he thought, the more questions filled his mind. Why hadn't Laura ever mentioned someone like him? She'd always been open about her life, or so he thought. He had known her since she was 23. They had shared everything, or at least he believed they had. That evening, Daniel found himself walking through the old boxes Laura had kept in the attic. Letters, photos, mementos from years ago. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, maybe just a clue. Most of it was familiar. Their wedding pictures, old postcards from trips they took, cards from friends. But one box caught his attention. It was sealed with tape and tucked behind the others as if it had been hidden away on purpose. He hesitated before opening it. Inside were a few letters tied together with a faded ribbon. The handwriting wasn't hers. It looked younger, uncertain. There was also a small photo of a baby, maybe a few months old. The back of the photo had faint writing. For you with love, L. Daniel's hands trembled. He didn't understand. A baby for who? Why had she kept it hidden? He sat there for hours, staring at that photo. His mind went back to the young man at the grave. Could there be a connection? The resemblance. Now that he thought about it, there had been something in the young man's face that felt oddly familiar. The eyes, maybe. The next few days were a blur. He couldn't focus on anything else. Every sound in the house reminded him of Laura. Every memory felt like a puzzle missing a piece. The following Sunday, Daniel went back to the cemetery earlier than usual, hoping to see the young man again. He waited for nearly an hour before he appeared. This time Daniel didn't let him walk away. Wait, he called out. The young man stopped, looking uncertain. Please, Daniel said, taking a step closer. Tell me how you knew her. The young man's eyes filled with emotion. He looked down, then met Daniel's gaze again. It's hard to explain, he said quietly. I think you deserve to know, but I'm not sure where to start. Daniel felt his chest tighten again, that mix of dread and hope twisting inside him. Start with your name, he said. My name's Ethan, the young man replied. His voice was steady but soft, as if carrying something heavy. And she was my mother. The world around Daniel seemed to stop. The trees, the birds, even the wind, everything went silent. He just stared at Ethan, trying to process what he had said. His mouth went dry. What did you say? He whispered. Ethan's eyes glistened. I didn't know her well, he said. She found me a few years ago, but we never got the chance to meet properly. She told me about you. She said you were the kindest person she'd ever known. Daniel couldn't move. He could barely breathe. His thoughts were spinning so fast that words wouldn't come. Ethan took a step back, his voice trembling now. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to say goodbye to her. In person. Before Daniel could respond, Ethan turned and walked away again, leaving Daniel standing alone beside the grave. The truth hit him like a wave. He looked down at the flowers, his lilies beside Ethan's single white rose, and felt his knees weaken. A lifetime of love, years of trust, and suddenly everything he thought he knew about Laura was shifting. The world that once felt familiar now seemed filled with secrets. And deep down, Daniel knew this was only the beginning of a story he was never supposed to discover. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words echoing over and over in his mind. She was my mother. Those 4 words had changed everything. He tried to tell himself there had been some mistake. Maybe the young man was confused, maybe he meant something else. But deep down, Daniel knew. The look in his eyes, the way he spoke about Laura, it wasn't a lie. It was too real. The next morning, Daniel sat by the kitchen table with the old photograph he had found in the attic. The baby in the picture had Laura's smile. The more he looked at it, the more the truth began to take shape. He remembered the way Laura sometimes went quiet when he mentioned the past. She'd always been open about most things, but whenever the topic of her younger years came up, she would quickly change the subject. He'd never questioned it. Now he wished he had. He held the photo close, feeling a heaviness in his chest. How could she have kept something so big from him? A child, her child. Their entire life together, and she never said a word. But even through the anger and confusion, another feeling began to rise. Sadness. What must she have gone through to hide something like that? What kind of pain had she carried all those years? By the afternoon, Daniel knew he couldn't live with unanswered questions. He needed to see Ethan again. He needed to know the whole story, no matter how much it hurt. The next Sunday came quickly. Daniel went to the cemetery earlier than usual, carrying 2 sets of flowers, one for Laura and one for Ethan. just in case he came back. He waited for nearly an hour, pacing along the path. When he finally saw Ethan walking through the gate, his heart began to race. The young man looked surprised to see him there. "You came back," Daniel said quietly. Ethan nodded, his expression cautious. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." Daniel looked at him for a long moment before replying, "I don't know what I want yet, but I need to understand." They stood there in silence, the sound of rustling leaves filling the air. Finally, Ethan spoke. "She found me when I was about 18, he said. "I didn't even know who my real mother was before that. I grew up thinking my aunt was my mom. My grandmother raised me for a while too, but she passed away when I was young. I didn't know much about where I came from, just that my parents weren't around." Daniel listened carefully, his hands trembling slightly. "One day," Ethan continued, "I got a letter in the mail. It was from her, from Laura. She said she was sorry for not being there when I was little. She said she wanted to explain everything, but she didn't have the courage to face me yet. She asked if I could forgive her." He looked down at the ground, his voice softening. "At first, I didn't even believe it. I thought someone was playing a joke, but then she sent another letter and she wrote things about my childhood that only my grandmother would have known. That's when I knew it was real." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He imagined Laura sitting somewhere quietly writing those letters, maybe crying as she did, maybe afraid of what he would think if he ever found out. "Did she ever tell you about me?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes. She told me about you. She said you were the best person she ever met. That you took care of her, loved her, and made her feel safe. She said she never told you about me because she didn't want to lose you." Those words hit Daniel hard. He turned away, staring at the grave. His eyes began to sting, but he blinked the tears away. "Did you ever meet her?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, we planned to, but she got sick. She said she'd tell you about me once she felt stronger. Then she stopped replying to my letters. I thought maybe she changed her mind. I didn't know she'd passed until a few months ago. That's when I found this place." The weight of it all pressed down on Daniel's chest. For a long time, neither of them spoke. After a while, Daniel said softly, "She should have told me. I would have understood." Ethan gave a small, sad smile. "I think she knew that. But I guess some secrets are hard to face even when you mean well." They stood there together for a long moment, both lost in thought. For the first time, Daniel saw something in Ethan he hadn't noticed before. A faint resemblance. The curve of his jaw, the way he frowned slightly when thinking. It reminded him of Laura. "Where do you live?" Daniel finally asked. "Just outside town," Ethan said. "I work at the hardware store." Daniel nodded. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Ethan looked surprised. "You'd want that?" "I don't know what I want," Daniel admitted honestly. "But I think Laura would want me to know you. And maybe I want that too." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'd like that." They agreed to meet the following week at a small cafe near the park. When the day came, Daniel arrived early, nervous and unsure of what to say. He hadn't been this anxious in years, but when Ethan walked in smiling awkwardly, something in Daniel softened. They talked for hours. Ethan told him about his life, how he'd grown up moving from place to place, never really feeling like he belonged anywhere. How he'd always wondered why his real parents had disappeared. Daniel listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes lost in his thoughts. When it was his turn, he told Ethan about Laura. The little things, like how she loved to paint, how she always burned toast, how she couldn't go a day without humming while cooking. Ethan laughed softly, eyes shining. "She sounded amazing," he said. "She was." Daniel replied with a faint smile. "She really was." By the time they left the cafe, the awkwardness had faded. It wasn't easy, but something gentle had begun between them. Not quite father and son yet, but something close, something fragile. That night, Daniel sat at home thinking about the day. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. It was strange, almost unsettling. but in a way that gave him hope. Maybe Laura had left something behind after all, something more than memories. As days passed, Daniel found himself thinking about Ethan often. He'd catch himself wondering if he'd eaten, if he was doing okay at work, if he needed anything. He tried to ignore those thoughts, but they always came back. One Sunday, when Daniel arrived at the cemetery, Ethan was already there. He was cleaning the stone, wiping away the dirt and fallen leaves. When Daniel approached, Ethan looked up and smiled. "I thought I'd beat you here today," he said. Daniel smiled back. "You did?" They spent the morning together, sitting by Laura's grave, talking quietly. There was no anger now, no confusion, just two people connected by love for the same woman. Before they left, Ethan said softly, "You know, she always said she wanted peace. Maybe this is what she meant, for you and me to meet." Daniel looked at him, the words settling deep inside. For the first time, they felt true. Later that evening, as Daniel drove home, he found himself whispering out loud as if speaking to Laura. "You could have told me," he said with a gentle smile. "But I think I understand why you didn't." The wind blew softly through the open window, and for a fleeting moment he felt something warm. Not sorrow, not regret, but peace. Maybe this was her way of making sure he wasn't alone anymore. And deep inside, Daniel knew. This was just the beginning. The next few weeks felt different for Daniel. For the first time since Laura's passing, he found himself looking forward to something. Every Sunday, he and Ethan would meet at the cemetery, talk for a while, and then grab coffee or lunch nearby. What began as awkward small talk slowly turned into longer conversations. They spoke about everything: life, work, memories of Laura, and even the small things that made no real sense but helped them feel connected. Ethan was careful at first, as if walking on thin ice. He didn't want to push too much or say the wrong thing, but Daniel always kept his tone kind, though there were moments when emotion crept in and his eyes grew distant. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench, Ethan asked, "Do you ever feel angry? You know, about what she didn't tell you?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "At first, yes. I felt hurt, betrayed even. I thought about all those years we spent together and how she kept something like this from me. But the more I think about it, the more I realize she was probably scared. Maybe she thought it was too late to explain. Maybe she just didn't want to cause pain." Ethan nodded slowly. "I guess I understand that. I think she carried that guilt for a long time." "She must have," Daniel said softly. "But she also must have loved you a lot. Otherwise, she wouldn't have tried to find you." Ethan looked down, his hands clasped together. "I just wish I could have met her in person, even once, to say thank you, to tell her that I forgive her." Daniel reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think she knows," he said. "Somewhere she knows." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. For Daniel, it felt like a small piece of peace settling inside his heart, a feeling he hadn't known for a long time. Over the next month, Daniel started inviting Ethan over for dinner. At first, Ethan hesitated, saying he didn't want to intrude, but Daniel insisted. "You're not intruding," he said. "You're family." Those words made Ethan smile, in a way Daniel hadn't seen before, a smile that felt almost like Laura's. The first dinner was simple: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and Laura's favorite green beans with garlic. Daniel hadn't cooked that meal since she passed. The smell filled the house with old memories. As they ate, Daniel told Ethan stories about Laura's love for cooking and how she used to dance around the kitchen when her favorite song played. Ethan laughed. "I can imagine that," he said. "She sounds like she was full of life." "She was," Daniel said with a soft smile. "Even when things were hard, she always found a reason to smile. That's what I miss most." Ethan looked around the house, noticing the small touches. Laura's painting still on the walls, her books neatly stacked on the shelf, a half-finished puzzle sitting by the window. "You kept everything the same," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. I couldn't change it. It still feels like she's here somehow. That night after Ethan left, Daniel sat alone in the living room. The house didn't feel as empty as before. For the first time in a long while, he didn't dread the silence. It felt different now, softer, like the beginning of healing. But even as things grew warmer between them, Daniel couldn't help but feel a small fear inside him. He wondered if Ethan truly wanted him in his life or if their connection was only tied to Laura's memory. Sometimes he caught himself thinking, would he still come around if she hadn't brought us together? One afternoon, Daniel stopped by the hardware store where Ethan worked. He wanted to surprise him and maybe take him to lunch. When he walked in, he saw Ethan helping an elderly man choose some paint. Ethan smiled warmly, explaining things with patience and kindness. Daniel stood quietly in the corner watching. It made his chest swell with pride. After the customer left, Ethan spotted him and grinned. Hey, didn't expect to see you here. I thought I'd check on you, Daniel said with a smile. You free for lunch? Yeah, just give me 10 minutes, Ethan said, wiping his hands and putting away a few boxes. They went to a small diner nearby, the kind that had old pictures on the walls and smelled like coffee and homemade pie. They talked about simple things, work, the weather, the neighborhood. It was easy, natural. Halfway through lunch, Ethan looked serious. Can I ask you something? Of course, Daniel said. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if she had told you about me back then? Daniel sighed softly. Every day. But I also think life has a strange way of choosing the right time for things. Maybe I wasn't meant to know then. Maybe I was meant to find you now. Ethan smiled faintly. That sounds like something she would have said. They both laughed. And for a brief moment it felt like the heaviness between them lifted. Later that evening, Daniel went back home, but he couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. The truth was, he did wonder. He imagined what it would have been like to watch Ethan grow up, to teach him how to ride a bike, to see him off to school, to sit together at the dinner table as a family. Those were things he and Laura had always dreamed about but never got to have. Now, in a strange way, life was giving him a second chance. The following weekend, Ethan brought an old photo album he'd found at his grandmother's house. Inside were a few pictures of Laura when she was much younger, smiling, holding a small child. Daniel's breath caught when he saw it. That's you, he said softly, pointing to the baby in her arms. Ethan nodded. Yeah, my grandmother must have kept these all this time. Daniel traced the photo with his finger. She looks happy, he whispered. She does, Ethan said. I think she wanted to remember that time, even if it was painful. Daniel looked at Ethan, his voice trembling slightly. You have her eyes. I didn't notice it before, but now I can't unsee it. Ethan smiled shyly. I get that a lot. That moment, something changed between them. The distance that had quietly existed was gone. They were no longer just strangers connected by a secret. They were family finally finding each other. Over time, Ethan started visiting Daniel more often. Sometimes they'd have dinner. Other times they'd just sit and talk for hours. Daniel started teaching him how to fix small things around the house, the leaky faucet, the broken fence. It reminded him of how it might have been if they'd shared those moments years ago. One evening, after fixing a light switch, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air smelled like rain and the sky was turning shades of pink and purple. Ethan turned to Daniel and said quietly, You know, I used to think I didn't need anyone. I got used to doing everything alone. But lately, it feels nice having someone to talk to. Someone who cares. Daniel looked at him and smiled. You're not alone anymore. Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening slightly. Neither are you. Those words stayed with Daniel long after Ethan left that night. He realized that maybe Laura's secret hadn't been meant to hurt him. Maybe she had known that one day her absence would lead to something new, something that would bring healing where there was once only grief. The next Sunday, as they stood by Laura's grave together, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He placed a hand on the gravestone and whispered, We're okay now. You don't have to worry anymore. Ethan placed a single white rose beside the lilies. She'd be happy, he said softly. Daniel nodded. I think she is. They stood there in silence, the gentle wind moving through the trees. And in that stillness, it almost felt like Laura was there with them, not as a memory, but as a quiet presence, smiling from somewhere beyond. As they walked away side by side, Daniel realized that sometimes life gives you back what you thought was gone forever, not in the way you expect, but in a way that heals you. And for the first time since she left, he didn't feel like he was saying goodbye. The bond between Daniel and Ethan grew quietly over the next few months. It wasn't rushed or forced. It just happened little by little with every shared story, every quiet meal, and every visit to the cemetery. It was strange how something born from loss could bring so much warmth, but that was what Laura's memory had done. Daniel often thought about how life had changed since the day he first saw Ethan standing by the grave. Back then he had felt nothing but pain and confusion. Now he felt something different, peace. It didn't mean he had stopped missing Laura. He never would. But somehow Ethan's presence made that emptiness easier to carry. One Sunday morning, Daniel decided to visit the cemetery earlier than usual. When he arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting on the grass beside the gravestone. He was talking softly, almost as if speaking to Laura. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just stood back and listened. "I hope you're proud of me," Ethan was saying. "I'm trying my best, and I'm taking care of him just like you wanted." Daniel smiled to himself. When Ethan finally noticed him, he stood quickly, brushing the grass from his jeans. "I didn't see you there," he said, looking embarrassed. "It's all right," Daniel said gently. "You don't have to stop talking to her on my account." They both laughed a little. It was a comfortable kind of laughter, the kind that only comes when two people have finally let down all their walls. Afterward, they drove to a small bakery near the lake. They sat by the window, sipping coffee and watching the morning light dance on the water. It had become their little tradition, visiting her grave and then talking about life afterward. As they sat there, Ethan pulled out a small notebook from his bag. "I've been writing letters to her," he said. "I never got the chance to tell her things when she was alive, so I write them now. It helps." Daniel looked at the notebook, the pages filled with handwriting. "That's a good thing," he said softly. "Sometimes putting words on paper is the only way to keep someone close." Ethan smiled. "Do you ever talk to her when you're alone?" "All the time," Daniel said with a chuckle. "Sometimes I even argue with her, just like old times." That made Ethan laugh. "Sounds like you two must have been quite the pair." "We were," Daniel said, his eyes softening. "She could light up a room without even trying, but she also had this quiet strength. You remind me of her in that way." Ethan looked down, touched by the words. "That means a lot," he said. Days passed and life found a gentle rhythm. Daniel had started fixing up his house, something he hadn't had the energy to do since Laura's passing. Ethan often came over to help, and together they painted the walls, replaced the old porch steps, and repaired the squeaky doors. It wasn't just about fixing the house. It was about bringing life back into it. One afternoon, as they painted the living room, Daniel said quietly, "You know, this house never felt empty when she was here. After she left, I thought I'd never feel warmth in it again. But now, I do. It feels alive again." Ethan looked up from the paint roller. "Maybe that's her way of staying around," he said. "Through the people she loved." Daniel nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "Maybe you're right." When they finished for the day, they sat outside on the porch covered in flecks of paint and laughing at how terrible their work looked. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. A mix of effort, laughter, and the quiet joy of building something together. Ethan looked at Daniel and said, "You know, I never really had this before. Someone to teach me things or even to talk to about small stuff. It's nice," Daniel smiled softly. "It's nice for me too." He paused, then added, "You don't have to feel like you're alone anymore, Ethan. You've got me now. Maybe it's late, but I'm here." Those words made Ethan look away for a moment, his voice thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "I never thought I'd hear that," he said. "Thank you." Their connection deepened after that day. They started spending weekends together, fixing things, cooking meals, or simply talking about life. Daniel began showing Ethan the things he had learned from years of hard work: how to build, how to repair, how to stay patient when life didn't go as planned. In return, Ethan taught Daniel about all the new things he'd missed: music, technology, little joys that reminded him life was still moving forward. Sometimes, they would take long walks by the lake in the evenings. Those quiet moments became Daniel's favorite part of the week. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ethan said, "It's strange how everything can change from one moment. If I hadn't gone to her grave that day, I would never have met you." Daniel nodded. "And if I hadn't gone that morning, I might have missed you completely." They both smiled at the thought. Fate had a strange way of weaving lives together, but not every day was easy. There were moments when Daniel still struggled with guilt. Guilt for not knowing, for not asking more about Laura's past, for all the years lost between him and Ethan. And sometimes, Ethan wrestled with his own feelings, wondering if he truly belonged in Daniel's life, or if he was just a reminder of something painful. One evening, after dinner, Daniel noticed Ethan seemed quieter than usual. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, then said, "Do you ever wish I hadn't come? That you'd never found out about me?" The question hit Daniel like a wave. "Why would you think that?" "I don't know," Ethan said softly. I don't want to feel like I ruined the way you remember her." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but full of warmth. "Listen to me, Ethan. You didn't ruin anything. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. A reason to keep living. You didn't take her away. You brought her closer." Ethan's eyes glistened. "You really mean that?" Daniel nodded. Every word. That night after Ethan left, Daniel sat alone by the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor, and he whispered softly, "You were right. Laura, he's everything you said he was." It felt as if she was listening, somewhere far beyond the night sky. A few days later, Ethan came by with something in his hand, a small wooden box. "I made this for you," he said. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a framed photo, the picture of Laura holding him as a baby, next to a recent photo of Daniel and Ethan standing at the grave together. Beneath the photos was a small note, for the family she left behind but never truly lost. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice broke. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." Ethan smiled softly. "I just wanted you to know that she's still with us, in both of us." From that day on, the framed photo sat on Daniel's mantel. Every time he looked at it, he felt both sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the years lost, and gratitude for the miracle that had brought them together. As autumn arrived, the leaves began to change colors and the cemetery took on a new kind of beauty. One Sunday, as they stood by Laura's grave, Daniel noticed something. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. The grief that once consumed him had softened into love, a love that now had two forms, the woman he'd lost and the son he'd found. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "You know, I think she planned this." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, I think so too." They stood quietly, watching the leaves fall around them, the gentle wind carrying the scent of earth and flowers. And for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he was visiting a grave. He felt like he was standing in the middle of something alive, something she had started and that would now continue through them. When they finally walked away together, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. Life had taken something from him once, but now, it had given him something back, not as a replacement, but as a continuation of love in another form. He looked at Ethan beside him, smiling, and thought to himself, maybe this is what she wanted all along, for us to find each other, to heal, and to keep living. And in that quiet moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel whispered under his breath, "Thank you, Laura, for everything." The year passed quietly, but for Daniel and Ethan it was a year filled with change, healing, and new beginnings. What had started with tears at a grave had slowly grown into a bond stronger than either of them had imagined. They had become family, not just in name, but in heart. Daniel still visited the cemetery every Sunday, but he no longer went there to cry. Now he went to talk, to share news, to laugh softly at the memories, and to thank Laura for what she had left behind. One afternoon, Ethan found an old photo album in a box in Daniel's attic. The cover was worn out, the edges yellowed with age. Inside were hundreds of pictures, of Daniel and Laura in their early years, smiling, laughing, traveling, building their life together. Ethan flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes shining with wonder. "She looks so happy," he said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. She was. She always found joy in the little things. That's what I miss the most. Ethan looked at a photo of her standing by a lake, her hair blowing in the wind, her smile wide and free. You can almost feel it in how alive she was. Daniel nodded. She had a way of making every place brighter. He paused for a moment, his voice quieter. You've got that same light, you know. Ethan looked down, caught off guard. Me? Yes, Daniel said with a small smile. You might not see it, but I do. Every time you walk into this house, it feels alive again. She'd be proud of you. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just closed the album and said quietly, I think she's proud of both of us. They spent that evening looking through the old pictures, laughing at funny outfits and old stories. For Daniel, it was bittersweet, seeing those moments again, remembering all the love and life they once had. But for the first time, it didn't hurt as much. The sadness had turned into gratitude. Weeks turned into months. Ethan began visiting more often, sometimes staying over on weekends. He helped Daniel in the garden, learned to cook some of his mother's favorite recipes, and even started restoring her old piano. One night, while cleaning out the shed, Ethan found a small box with Laura's handwriting on it. The label said, "For Daniel, when the time is right." He hesitated before bringing it inside. "Did you know about this?" he asked. Daniel looked surprised. "No, I don't remember seeing that before." They sat at the kitchen table as Daniel carefully opened the box. Inside was a folded letter and a few small items, a locket, an old photograph, and a sealed envelope with Ethan's name written on it. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the letter. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, just like her. He began to read silently, but then decided to read aloud. "My dear Daniel," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means life has taken its turn, and I'm no longer there to say these words myself. But please don't let grief keep you from living. I want you to smile again, to laugh, and to love the world the way we once did." Daniel paused, his voice breaking slightly, then continued. "There's something I need to tell you. Years before we met, I made a mistake, not out of malice, but confusion and fear. That mistake became a blessing I never stopped loving. His name is Ethan. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't find the right moment. I was afraid you wouldn't forgive me. But if life ever brings him to you, please, don't turn him away. He is part of me, and part of you, even if not by blood. He will remind you of the good in people, the same good you always showed me. Take care of him, the way I know only you can." Daniel's eyes blurred with tears by the time he finished reading. For a long moment, there was only silence in the kitchen. Ethan sat frozen, not knowing what to say. Finally, Daniel reached out and placed a hand over Ethan's. "She knew this would happen," he said softly. "She wanted us to find each other." Ethan swallowed hard. "I think she did." They sat there for a long while, neither speaking. It wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore. It was peaceful, the kind that comes when words are no longer needed. After a few minutes, Daniel pushed the envelope toward Ethan. "You should read yours," he said gently. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a short note written in the same familiar handwriting. "My dear boy, if you ever find this, know that I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. Life separated us, but my heart never forgot. If you're reading this, it means Daniel has found you. He is a good man, kind, patient, full of love. Please take care of him and let him take care of you. You both need each other more than you know. Love always, Mom." Ethan pressed the letter to his chest, his eyes filling with tears. For the first time, he felt a sense of closure. Not the kind that ends things, but the kind that finally brings peace. Later that night, Daniel sat on the porch, looking at the stars. Ethan joined him, the letter still in his hand. "She really planned all of this, didn't she?" Ethan said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. "She always had a way of bringing people together." They sat in silence, the night air cool and calm around them. Daniel looked at Ethan and said, "You know, I used to think I had lost everything when she passed. But now I realize she gave me something even after she was gone. You." Ethan's voice trembled as he said, "And you gave me what I never had. A father." Daniel smiled, his eyes misty but full of warmth. "Then I guess we both found what we were missing." In the months that followed, life slowly took on new meaning. Daniel began volunteering at a local community center, helping young people learn carpentry. Ethan often joined him, teaching kids how to repair old furniture and use their hands to build something meaningful. Together they became known as a pair, the quiet man with kind eyes and the young man who brought laughter everywhere he went. On the first anniversary of the day they met, they visited the grave together. The sky was clear and the air was still. Daniel brought a single white lily, and Ethan brought a letter he had written. They placed both at the headstone. Daniel whispered, "We're doing okay. Laura, you don't have to worry anymore." Ethan smiled softly and said, "Thank you for giving me a family." As they turned to leave, Daniel stopped and looked back one last time. For a brief second he thought he felt her presence, that familiar warmth, that gentle peace. He didn't need to see her to know she was there. That night, back home, they sat by the fire. The photo frame Ethan had made stood proudly on the mantel. The flickering flames danced across the glass, lighting up their faces and the memories behind them. Ethan looked at Daniel and said, "You think she'd be happy seeing us now?" Daniel chuckled softly. "She'd probably be telling us to stop being so sentimental and start eating dinner." They both laughed, and the room filled with warmth and light, the same light that had once come from Laura, now shared between them. Before heading to bed, Daniel looked at the picture once more. He whispered quietly, "You were right, my love. He's everything you said he was, and I'll take care of him just like you asked."